episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is Dr. David Rattner, late of Massachusetts General Hospital. David is, of course, known around the world as one of the great innovators and contributors in the world of general surgery, president of SAGES, developer of technologies and new techniques, and a great mentor to many young surgeons over many years. You'll hear something about that and how he progressed his academic career in Boston, where he spent essentially all of his professional career. But I think some of the more interesting things he discusses in this conversation today is in relation to passion in the workplace and concepts of retirement and when it's time to stop and issues such as that. Fascinating and mature, thoughtful reflections from somebody who's been there, done that. So I hope you enjoy. My name is John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives. One more thing. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and check out the podcast version if your thing is to listen while at the gym or driving home. Hope you enjoy this episode of Surgeons' Lives. Hey, David, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Greetings.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining our little soiree today, which we have very grandly called, or I have very grandly called, Surgeons' Lives, but the more important bit is the second line that says stuff that matters, which is not necessarily the CV, although we use the CV as a little bit of a segue into find out what is really making the person tick. So thanks very much for taking the time to join.
Sure. Glad to do it. I'm kind of living the dream these days.
Well, so you're going to have to tell me where the dream is currently located.
I'm in Boston right now.
In Boston. Okay. You're returning to the proper weather. I just somebody put a weather warning up on the web yesterday in Florida to say that you shouldn't go out after 11 a.m. until the 1st of November. So
yeah, it's weird. We bought a place in West Palm Beach, and I was actually down there end of July, early August, and the weather, frankly, was better than it was in Boston, which was very hot and humid at the time, but at least we had a nice breeze. And if it rained an hour in the late afternoon, so be it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what I ask people to do, and I've interviewed people, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see any of these on YouTube or anything like that, but I've interviewed, I release these maybe every 2 weeks. And I've interviewed people from around the world and different specialties and one thing or another, but I always ask people to start, which I will ask you, if you don't mind, to start with the words I was born in, and I don't mean what year.
Oh boy. Yeah, so sure. I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan. My father was a urology resident at the time.
Yeah.
And my early childhood was in Philadelphia, but we moved back to the Detroit area where my entire family is located and is from. Born and raised there. Went to University of Michigan, and then came to the East Coast to go to medical school at Johns Hopkins, and I never went back to Michigan after that.
Oh.
So
I guess the surgery or the medicine came from your dad or your family. I mean, was it a big medical family or?
No, not at all. I actually tried to resist for quite a while. I had been to the hospital with my father as a young kid, and I was kind of turned off. But when I was in college, it was the times of the hippies, really, and the counterculture. And I thought that business was inherently bad. So I was on a track to go to law school and actually participated in a famous case in Detroit where the police broke into a Republican New Africa meeting and shot everybody in this meeting. It was an interesting trial, and I was sort of it's my senior project in high school. So I was big on the social action front, and University of Michigan was a very liberal place, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But I just, I guess when I was about a junior, I kind of felt a calling to make sure I did something to make the world a better place. And I wasn't sure lawyers were necessarily those people.
I was
Some
gonna
are,
say.
some are, but it was a very uninformed, judgment that you'd have as a
Sure.
19-year-old person.
Yeah.
And I ended up being fired as a camp counselor, needing a job. And so my father got me a job as an orderly at Sinai Hospital in Detroit, and I was holding hooks on surgical procedures. And I had a very charismatic Mexican resident, ECFMG, as they would say,
Mhm.
who it showed me how much fun surgery was. So I was like, then I was sort of into it. I had sort of hedged my bets because I took organic chemistry to get that out of the way. And I actually loved chemistry. It made sense to me. So the sciences came pretty natural. I ended up being a biochem major and applied to medical school. And then, yeah, I mean, then the rest sort of flowed pretty naturally.
You didn't, dabble with psychiatry or dermatology or internal medicine. You always knew you were going to do surgery, or what?
More, well, I mean, there were sort of flirtations with the different specialties. I loved delivering babies. I thought it was the greatest thing that I ever did, but the thought of doing OB/GYN all the time, I couldn't get myself there. I liked medicine a lot, but I basically, still am a frustrated athlete. I played sports all the way through college, and there's something about the team aspect of surgery that I really enjoyed. I also, at times, might not be the most patient person in the world. So to be able to see your results and the impact that you have on people in surgery, it's much easier than in medicine, where it's a lot of chronic disease and so forth. So that's probably the factors that played into it.
What was your sport?
Hockey, ice hockey.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And did you survive with full levels of dentition?
Almost. A couple broken noses and little of this and that, and one missing tooth that I've never had replaced. Yeah,
Yeah, that
pretty
was,
good.
of course, that was in the era when real men didn't wear helmets.
So I was in a sort of a transitional phase. We did when I first started in the Pee-wees, we actually had leather helmets, believe it or not. But they quickly transitioned to the Europeans were wearing plastic helmets,
Yeah,
and by the time I was in high school, we were all wearing helmets, and by the time I got to college, even face shields. So
yeah.
it got that got to be better.
And you're still a hockey fan?
Oh yeah, we don't want to talk too much hockey this year. My team sort of fell on their face.
So I was going to ask him, would that team's first name be Boston?
Possibly, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. It's. I think there's a fairly widespread degree of mourning about that. But anyway, moving. So you did your residency. Um,
So I left Hopkins and I took a flyer on applying to the MGH for my surgical residency. I figured there's no way they're going to let me in, and some of it went back to my medical school interview. And I think this is people would be interested in this. I did fine at Michigan. I did very well, and I was interviewed for Harvard Medical School, and it was almost like the movie The Paper Chase, where a guy with sort of pink glasses and a bow tie was talking to me, and he asked me what the last book I had read was, and I answered honestly. I said it's was Childhood's End. He goes, "Who's that by?" I said, "Arthur C. Clarke." He goes, "Is that some sort of science fiction or something?" And I said, it is. And at that moment in the interview, I know I was probably not getting into Harvard.
Yeah. Yeah, I always tell people, my friend who became a departmental chair in England was interviewed in St. Bartholomew's Hospital. And he was not from London, and none of his family were from St. Bartholomew's or trained there. And when the interviewer had exhausted the questioning as to which member of his family was in Bart's, he asked him what his dad did, and he said, "Well, he's actually a painter." And he said, "Oh, is he landscape or portraits?" And he said, "No, battleships," because he worked in a shipyard. And he said he swears to this day that the rejection letter was on the same train as he was going back to Newcastle.
Yeah. Well, at the end, I'll just skip ahead a little bit because ultimately I became a full Harvard professor, tenured professor, and you can't be promoted to full professor, it turns out, unless you have a lesser degree from some Harvard institution. And since I didn't go to Harvard College and I didn't go to Harvard Medical School, they had to give me a master's in science from Harvard to make me a professor. So, so I got that. I put it on my wall, and one day I was interviewing or talking to one of the residents who was a Preparation H type of a resident, and she said, "Wait a minute, what's that on your wall? You didn't go to Harvard." I go, "You're right, I didn't, but I bet you I got one up on you because I didn't go to a single class and I got my degree."
Yeah, well, if you listen to the interview I did with Robbie Madoff, you'll discover, which he's never hidden, that when he was in Minnesota doing his residency, and he took a year off, and the chairman was John Najarian, and through one thing or another, they stuck him in the lab when he came back, and then he went into fourth year, and they forgot he hadn't done the third year. So he just completed his residency, and they said, "Oh, never mind."
Right, right. Well,
So
life is strange. Yeah.
so there you were in doing your residency, and as they say, the rest is history. But how did that transpire for you? Did you? Most people have some recognition of mentors at some point in their life. Did you have mentors, and was it something that you sought out, or was it serendipitous?
I would have said it was organic. Um, One of the most surprising thing about a residency at Mass General at that point in time was it wasn't snobby, stuck up, or the things that I had imagined as an outsider. It was very difficult to get in, but once you were in, you were part of the family.
Yeah,
And um, many of the attendings, you would be able to call them by their first name. I mean, there was unquestionably a hierarchical structure, but it was, the philosophy at that point in time was we got the 8 interns we want. We're going to do everything we can to make them successful. It wasn't, and it was in contrast, frankly, to the Hallstedian program at Hopkins. And it was
yeah,
one of the reasons I decided to go to MGH and not stay at Hopkins, which was a possibility. And so, yes, you did get some beatings when you did things poorly, or you slipped up, but by and large, it was to make you the best that they could make you, figure out what you're really good at, and sort of track you towards that. Now, they seemed to have in their mind that I was going to be a cardiac surgeon, and I did the senior cardiac senior residency as a third year resident rather than a fourth or a fifth. And honestly, it scared the bejesus out of me at first, but ultimately, I learned to deal with it and cope with it. It was extremely stressful, but at the end of the day, it made me a much better surgeon in terms of dealing with adversity. Really, I don't know what the word we want to use here, but very difficult problems when the crap is really hitting the fan and you have to do something quickly and do the right thing. But at that point, cardiac surgery basically had 3 operations. You could either do a bypass, or you could do a mitral, or you could do an aortic valve. There really wasn't a whole lot else in
yes,
1981 or 82 going on. And the other thing about it is if you made a mistake doing a coronary, the patient just flat out died, and everybody knew that there was a
yeah.
problem. I just didn't like that. glommed on to both George and Artie. He was a very senior surgeon, and he was just a wonderful man and gentleman. And then Andy Warshaw, who was a bit of a rising star at that point in his career, but Andy and I saw the world in many ways the same way, and there was just an instant sort of a wow, we're on the same page kind of a phenomenon.
Who was the chair in MGH at that time?
Jerry Austin.
Oh
So
yeah, of course, yeah.
Dr. Austin is a whole nother story, and he through my career was an incredible mentor, incredibly supportive, and he eventually, as I was finishing, offered me a job. And he offered me a job. He said, "We want you to do some research and do some GI surgery," and he was phenomenal in that sense. And for me, with my personality, it was the right match. I didn't need someone writing me all the time and telling me what to do. He basically said, "I'll see you next year. Here's the money. We'll look at what you did, and then we'll go from there." And sort of with some guidance from Andy and with Dr. Austin providing that kind of, I don't know, it was just the kind of freedom that I needed. It worked. It worked.
So this was at a time before, you know, the transitional phases of general surgery into before laparoscopy and all of those things. Did you have, you know, if I was to ask you, like in the mid to late 80s when you were, did you have an interest? What was your interest? What did you think you would be doing?
I thought I'd be doing a lot of gastric surgery and pancreatic surgery. I was
Right.
always into the pancreas, and actually, one thing Warshaw was doing was diagnostic laparoscopy for pancreatic
Yeah.
cancer. He was one of the
Yeah.
people in the States that was doing it, and that turned out to be critical for my ultimate career.
Because you knew how to put the ports in and have a look around. It's amazing the number of people, you know, I did one of these with Barry Salkey, who was the same story. And you know, when I was in England as a resident, I worked with a guy who did just what you've just been describing: diagnostic laparoscopy for ascites, liver masses, pancreas, etc. So when laparoscopy came along, all of us knew how to put the ports in, and I had to look around, and it was a big issue for a lot of surgeons, general surgeons.
It's huge. I mean, don't forget, at that point in time, it was big surgeons make big incisions, and it was all about broad exposure. It was an entirely different way of thinking. They didn't have the tools that we have now, so you know, you have to put it back in context.
No, for sure, and you know, it was all one hand because you were looking through the you know, the camera with your eye, you know, etc. Did you and you know, we'll allow you claim it. When you saw laparoscopy starting, did you immediately see that this was the thing, or were you a late adopter, an early adopter, a Luddite, any of those, somewhere in between?
So I owe my start to Carl, the late Carl Zucker. Carl and I were both doing pancreatic research. We were sort of little pancreas fledglings, and we were at the American Pancreatic giving a poster, I think, side by side. I knew him a little bit, and he said, we were just chit-chatting. He said, "You know, why don't you come down next week? I'm going to do something really crazy. It's going to blow your mind. I'm going to take out a gallbladder with a laparoscope." I went and I saw Eddie Joe Reddick, and I can do this, and we're going to do our first one. Why don't, you know, we'd known each other a couple. Why don't you just come down, since, you know. So I did. I flew down to, I think it was Greater Baltimore Medical Center, if I remember correctly. I'm pretty sure it was GBMC.
Yeah.
And I watched it, and I watched him do a couple cases. I think there was a laser company that was sponsoring it or something. And I got on the plane back home, and I called Andy, and I said, "Andy, we have to do this." And when I talk about having a good boss or mentor, Andy believed in me enough to know that I wouldn't go crazy.
Yeah.
He sort of agreed with it, and Jerry Austin stayed out of the way. And so shortly thereafter, we did we did a bunch of pigs actually. And then we did our first case, which I don't know if it was the first in Boston, but it was pretty close if it wasn't. And just from the reputation of MGH, we got patients rapidly, and we were, off and running basically.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a common story for people around that era. I was in England at the time and I wasn't sure. I couldn't understand how they were doing this in the very early days. And I got in a plane and walked to Dublin where the late David Boucher Hayes was doing these. And I watched, as soon as I saw him do that case, I went, oh, yeah, okay, now I get it. I just went back and, there were no IRBs or any of that sort of stuff. Myself and Ara Darzi was my fellow at the time, and Ara and I decided to start the laparoscopic program there, and we just went slowly. And I remember when we wrote the paper on colorectal stuff in '92, we just done a bunch of cases in no rational way. So we made it sound as though we knew what we were doing in the Lancet paper, we're calling it an all-comers policy, which was our way of saying we just did everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty scary if you think back, but I think, we opened when we had to open. I never cut a bile duct. I was very lucky in that sense. And, I think it was, and I mean, just jumping ahead a little bit, it was so different than when we tried to introduce notes in terms of the IRB and IRB. I mean, frankly, if the IRB existed at that point in time, I'm not sure we would have ever gotten off the ground with lap chole. And there's plenty of horror stories and so forth, and we can debate that.
Sure.
It was a question of being in the right place at the right time with the right networking, and then just being a rational, reasonable human being and not being a cowboy.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in a hospital in Leeds where there was a Romanian heart surgeon who'd invented one of the Shiley valves.
Yeah.
And he was a genius. He was crazy, but he was a genius. But every one of those patients, without the attempt at a valve replacement, was going to die and did die. And so, he just did case after case. And, at the beginning, they died. And he just kept going until, as they say, the rest is history, so that, the heart surgeons ended up doing valves, grafts, and takebacks. I mean, valve surgery arose out of that, but it was certainly no randomized controlled trials at that stage, etc. So when you were doing this, did you think you were going to be there for your career, or was it did you see it as likely to be a stepping stone to greater fame and glory, or what was your ambition, or did you have a plan?
My only plan or my only goal really was to be a professor, and if it was at Harvard, that would be great. I really didn't have aspirations for some of the leadership things that happened. I didn't think that big. It was more, and the professor was in a sense a bit of a chip on my shoulder kind of a thing, because I was a kid from the Midwest who'd been turned down by Harvard, and I was going to just show them.
Sure.
Probably you had the same experience. You'd be reading papers and journals, and you go, "Wait a minute, I can do that. I could probably do it better than that."
Yeah.
So there was that element, but no, I mean, I had rapidly developed a huge clinical practice, probably too big for some of the academic things I was being asked to do. And then by reputation, that led to some leadership stuff. And then after that, once I got on that track, then they sent me for more training and so on.
And so, it just, as you say, it was organic in terms of the way you progressed at that point.
I think so. I mean, literally at that point, the mentorship was so different than what it is today. Honest to gosh, I met with Dr. Rawson once a year.
Yeah.
He spent half an hour talking about my family. He spent 5 minutes talking about how much he was going to pay me. And then the rest of the hour was sort of about different projects. Andy was there to bounce ideas off of, to help me network. There's a fair amount of competition internally, people being jealous of your success, but other people who want to join with you and form small teams in a bigger unit. And so you have to navigate that. I didn't think, frankly, that the internal politics at Mass General at that point were difficult or bad. I thought everybody had plenty of work to do. Everybody was kind of on their own P&L at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there wasn't a tremendous amount of cross subsidization, and the system seemed to work, very well during those early years.
So, I mean, I would normally ask this towards the end of an interview to people, but it seems appropriate to ask it now. I mean, the world then was very different to the world now. In no doubt in MGH and in almost every academic and indeed any institution. What's your sense as to the big changes? I mean, if you were to talking to a young mentee, between when you were a kid versus now, I mean, the bits that are good and the bits that are bad, are there bits that you mourn for? I mean, obviously the ability to do what you did, but how do you think it's fundamentally changed?
Well, first, I'm going to just couch this by saying I am concerned about sounding like a grumpy old man every time I
Sure.
this subject. I think the most fundamental and profound difference is this. I think if you ask me at 35 years old, David, who are you? I'd say I'm a surgeon at MGH. This is my wife, Barbara, and I have a family, or I like to ski. I think if you ask most surgeons now who they are, they'd say, I'm Bob Jones, I'm married to so-and-so, we like to do this and this, and I work at Mass General as a surgeon. And and I'll just take the local situation to amplify that even more. All of the physicians are employed. Morale is low at the moment. The residents here voted to unionize just recently.
Yes.
And I think that in an elite institution that sort of strives to be at the very top, it's sort of a sign of lack of professionalism or frayed values of what physicians are really worth, what they really contribute, to be viewed as just an employee and that they're replaceable and you can homogenize the workers is a huge change for us. I mean, it was the MGH was kind of a star system. It was kind of a decentralized entrepreneurial model. Now it's entirely corporate. So I think that's the change. Now the world has changed. The regulatory environment has changed. The reimbursement is probably not as good, even if inflation adjusted, as it was. Priorities of millennials and Gen Z, Gen X, their priorities are different, and I'm not going to place any value judgments on one or the other. So the world is very different. But the one thing that is troubling to me is this issue of professionalism.
Yeah.
I think we've downgraded the importance we place on excellence and especially on elite performance in the name of fairness, equity, a variety of different things. So I just think that I'm not on board necessarily with the way the list is prioritized at the moment. And again, it gets back to what's your mission? What are you really trying to achieve? So that's where I see the
Yeah, I think there's I mean, grumpy old man you may be, but you're not alone in that grumpy old man situation. A lot of people that I interview have bemoan some of those issues. And as you say, if you look at what people people don't leave institutions usually for a simple salary hike. They leave because, and there's evidence for this. I mean, they leave because they don't feel valued,
right.
And it's not a salary issue. I mean, the salary is a prerequisite and it's necessary, of course. But if you're only valued by your salary, you're permanently vulnerable to somebody tapping you on the shoulder saying, "I'll offer you $1,000 more." You and other doctors and indeed the doctors today, you don't work the way you work. The above and beyond the call of duty because of money. You do it because, that's really what I want to do. That's why I did this. The old phrase, the hackneyed phrase of, if you want to work banking hours, join a bank. And I don't mean that people should be working all hours of the day and night, but it's called a profession for a reason.
Right.
It's you're doing it because as you say, you want to try and do the best thing, and there are life cycles in the way that things happen, and I would agree with you that I think there are some aspects that the priority list is a little imbalanced. Now,
I think one word, John, you didn't mention that I think is important is passion.
mm-hmm.
And I think that in the current environment, there's enough, whether it's hassle factor, whether it's culture, but a lot of the joy is gone. I don't sense a lot of joy in people doing operations or seeing clinics of patients. And I know when we trained, there was joy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've often said to people, I've spent 20 years in the UK, working in the NHS. You sure as hell didn't do it for money, and you didn't do it for resources and glamorous beeping machines. People passionately believed in what they were doing, and they really gave it their best shot. And the deal was that, everybody worked as hard as they could and did their best as they could for the patients. And the patients knew this, and the administration knew this, and there was no blame for, and what happened subsequently over the last 20 years is that it's become a blaming issue. The resources are still not there, but we had fun when we were doing this because everybody knew you were trying to, you worked your butt off, but you really had fun doing it. And it was a team. And the big loss of in the working hours thing was that team camaraderie, because it's not fair on the resident being sent home at 65 hours in the UK,
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more.
So somewhere in this career, you developed this habit of dragging your golf clubs around the world with you. Were you a golfer from your teens?
No. In fact, my father belonged to a country club, played golf, and I absolutely hated it and revolted. And I think right before my first child went off to college, my wife said, "I've got a great anniversary present for her." And I said, "What's that?" She said, "I signed us up for a golf school." I go, "I hate golf. What's the matter with tennis?" She says, "Well, you always hit the ball back." And I said, "Is that a problem?" I said, "If you want, I can dump it in the net. I can, do I hit it too hard? No, you just hit the ball back." And we have to have something to do together when the kids leave the house. We're empty nested. So I was probably late 40s. And we went to golf school. And because I was a hockey player, it's not too dissimilar from hitting a slap shot, really.
Mm-hmm.
So I took to it. I also was at that point getting tired of playing tennis. I was slowing down. I just move as fast. And I just found myself daydreaming while waiting for someone to serve to me and stuff like that. And when I started to play golf, it was so difficult that it was the only thing that took my mind off of surgery or whatever problem I was dealing with administratively. So I would not take a phone. I did not even take my beeper. And for 3 hours, I could just be in my own world. And I sucked. But eventually it got better. And so, yeah, I enjoy it. And it's a great way to meet people. And yeah, you're right. I have played around the world now.
Other than the wind and the rough, what is your handicap? Do you have a handicap?
Yeah, it's bouncing around between 10 and 12 right now.
And I mean, I guess it's would be appropriate for me to say, we were just talking about the world has changed in the way healthcare is delivered. The world has suddenly changed recently in the way golf is about to be delivered with this, with people walking around looking at other people saying, "But you just lied to me last week."
Well, money talks. I mean, if you want, I can send you an interesting sort of deconstruction of the deal and why it really happened and so forth. It's not what the press reported.
Yeah, money talks, as you say. I think I heard Rory McIlroy pointing out that if you're competing against somebody that has a totally unlimited budget, that's not going to go well in general. In
That,
general
that,
principle,
right. Right. It's they were just going to keep it, litigating and litigating them until the PGA ran out of money. So
Yeah, exactly. So now, Jim Fleshman has a bucket list to attend a game at every baseball park in Major League in the USA. And Barry has some crazed ambition over golf courses in countries, etc. Do you have a bucket list for golfing, or just do it whenever possible?
well, actually, one of the things I found when I retired is it is possible to play too much golf, and so I limit myself to 3 times a week now. I don't enjoy it if I play more.
Yeah.
Um, unfortunately, I'll admit to, my body is changing, and I just don't bounce back from injury as quickly as I used to, or I get repetitive use injuries that I never had. So you have to pick and choose. It also is, it's a hard game, and if you actually still hold on to the belief that you can improve, it can be very frustrating. I still think I can get better.
Yeah.
It is frustrating, so I try to limit it. Is and no, I have really 3 or 4 priorities, which I knew before I retired. That one was to be much more knowledgeable about literature and American history. And so I went back to school, and I basically take Shakespeare courses, literature courses, and history courses. Another was to get in better condition physically than I was able to when I was working so hard, and I think I've succeeded at that. And then to see if I could be a better golfer or not. And I'm better than when I was still working, but I'm not. I once got down to single digits, but I'm having trouble getting back there right now. And then to spend as much time with my grandchildren as I can. And I can honestly say I spend more time with my grandkids than I spent with my own kids. So I love it.
Yeah.
Life is good. I'm married
It's
to.
a great aphorism given to me by a friend many years ago, which I trot out regularly, which is, surgeons are usually better grandparents than they are parents, etc. And I think there's some truth to that. So I ask people retirement questions, what triggers them, what are their, and of course I'm asking people who tell me, interviewing people who tell me, no, I don't, I think I see myself working till I'm 80. Or whereas I'm talking to, Robbie Madoff, who said, okay, I'm done in 3 months. I'm out of here. And I don't, I go to the opera and stuff like that. Jeff Matthews said to me, I think, people should start looking at cognitive measurement after 60 or 65. And Barry, as I'm sure, as, had always had a deal with a friend who would, whose arrangement was, you'll tell me if you think I need to stop. What are your thoughts generically about retirement? Do you think surgeons should be operating when they're 84? Do you think they should step aside and let somebody else have a go, or what?
I don't know that there's a blanket answer. I think we're all wired differently, and we all age differently. Aging doesn't occur at the same rate in everybody. Um, you know, I can't really speak for other. I can speak for myself, and that's that the joy was leaving me. I was, as you get more well known, and you know this even better than myself, your referrals change. I was doing redo esophagectomies, 4th-time paraesophageal hernias, big open cases, and the results were good. But I'd come home in the evening and I'd sit down for dinner and I'd just look across the table at my wife, and I literally couldn't talk. I just didn't have anything left in the tank. I didn't have anything to say, and my back would bother me a little bit. And then I'd be, 7:30 in the evening board meeting, and the next night I'd be out to recruit another surgeon or something, and it just wasn't fun. And and it was intense. I also found that when I was in a stressful situation, I didn't fall back to sleep easily. So I could tell that part of my brain biology uh, was going a little bit. And I had this list of things I wanted to do, and I had from the beginning had a financial planner that I was working with so that I could retire at 62, because I knew I wanted to do all these things. And every time I sort of mentioned this, I got an increase in my pay and I got a new title or something. And it was a bit of the golden handcuffs, but eventually it just was enough, and I needed to move on because I felt I was in a race against biology in terms of the physical things on my bucket list that I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine said to me, you should retire when you have enough and you've had enough. Um, and that, those are the measures. If one of those isn't right, maybe it's not the time for you. But and that is, as you say, different for different people at different times for all sorts of reasons. And sometimes they're external reasons, 401ks collapse and all that sort of stuff.
I think that, one of the things I see is people who keep going because they don't have a whole lot of outside interests,
hmm,
and they're very frightened about what are they going to do when they wake
yeah,
up and there are no cases on the schedule, and you see
yeah.
them hanging around at the doctor's dining room, and it's kind of sad to me.
Very. And we all know, you know, legendary figures, who suffered from that, and I have to say, in my experience, it rarely ends well, um, because they don't have somewhere to go, and I've seen sometimes male or female, their spouses struggle because they also were defined by being the spouse of the important surgeon. And it is a struggle. I mean, if you're if you collect comic books or something, it's just as important as spending silly amounts of money on cars that break down, etc., and stuff like, it doesn't really matter, does it? I mean, what it is, it's a matter to keep your brain alive, as much as
I mean,
anything
I
else.
think that's the issue. I mean, it's sort of when you're working as a surgeon or you're an administrative, every day there's a reason you got out of bed, and there are two or three things you got to fix and deal with, and all of a sudden that goes away, and you need to redefine
Yeah.
who are you? You're thrown into, and the other thing is you meet all these other retired people, and they don't give a damn who you were before. I
No.
mean, you're
Yeah.
starting fresh, and you can drop the titles now. Thank you.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's absolutely true. So I normally ask people sort of a double header question. One is, how would you like to be remembered, and how do you think you will be remembered? Do you have an easy answer for that?
Well, I'd like to be remembered as someone who was honest, accountable, integrity, hardworking, uh, good guy. That's fine for me. I don't care about how many citations I get, because whatever I did is going to be, 3 decades from now, will be completely out of date. Won't matter.
Exactly. They will be asking the question, were there two T's in the name?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't remember how you spell your name 6 months after you're gone, etc. Something like that. And some people end up being remembered for what they want. And I have to say, my experience with interviewing people at your stage of career is the overwhelming number of people that say, I'd like to be remembered as a good person. The younger ones are often saying something a little more detailed and technical, etc. But at the end of the day, you realize that, I think you're right. It's about integrity and being a good person. But it isn't, of course, necessarily what people are remembered for. I mean, for example, I'm sure Eddie Joe Reddick may or may not have been a very good person, but he'll always be remembered for one thing, which is, introducing gallbladders, laparoscopic cholecystectomy, etc. What advice would you? I mean, you have a realistic appraisal of the surgical profession, the medical profession over a career of, at the center of it. If you met a young graduating medical student, would you advise them to do surgery, or would you say, go west, young man, and never look back?
I tell them essentially what I told you earlier. You have to have passion for it. I think one of the big mistakes that's been made or being made is, and probably, I mean, I can't prove it. I have a hunch it may have related to the work hours restriction, that all of a sudden surgery was no different than medicine. I mean, they both were limited to 80 hours. And so all this idea of, beating your brains out during this intense residency was no longer true, and that surgery would be easy, or training in surgery would be easy. It's not true. Being a surgeon is hard on you, and you have to have the emotional or mental constitution to deal with failure and to take criticism and to improve, I think.
Mm.
And not everybody has that. And I think also, if you're not willing to make some sacrifices, you're going to be very ordinary. So you have to have passion. It has to be fun. And if it isn't fun for you, and you're looking for, if you want a job, then it's probably not right for you. If you want to have dramatic impact on people, but also hold the bag when things don't go well, then it's going to be great, and you're going to be with wonderful colleagues, and you'll do great things. So I think that's the test. It's, don't fool yourself that it's easy, but it's highly rewarding if you put the work in.
So if I was to ask it another way around, any regrets?
No, I just feel so fortunate that things that happened to me happened. Just one more anecdote which crystallized things for me. When I was in my late 40s, it was right after I started to play golf. I'm an expert skier, and I took a fluky little fall on an easy trail, ended up with a fractured dislocation of my shoulder and a very bad brachial plexus injury. Completely paralyzed, had reflex sympathetic dystrophy and terrible pain. And I had an EMG, and they said, well, we're not sure you're ever going to recover, blah, blah, blah. So during that, I mean, for example, I couldn't put my shoes on. I couldn't tie a tie. I couldn't cut a piece of meat.
Wow.
And during that time, I ended up writing and getting funded for the largest grant I ever got. I think it was a $12 million grant. So I was incredibly productive academically. And in about 3 months, things started to come back. But I realized at that point, and really the happiest day of my life still to this day, one of them was the day I walked in and did an operation with Matt Hutter, with me one-handed and telling Matt what to do. He was my fellow at the time. I'll never forget. And it crystallized to me, what it meant to be a surgeon, and how central that was to my identity. I mean, it was great to be famous and get all this money from the NIH, but frankly, it didn't make me nearly as happy as the surgical identity. And that rocked me out of my midlife crisis. It made me appreciate how quirky or capricious or spontaneous life could change and be with no fault of your own. And it made me appreciate every good day even more. And since I retired, honestly, I just try to every day suck the most out of it that I can and enjoy it. And if I have a chance to leave the world in better shape one way or another, I try to do that too. But it just, it gets to the point of, why are you a surgeon? What is your identity? And, I feel unbelievably fortunate to have had the opportunity.
Well, it's good to hear. And as you say, life is fleeting, unfair, transient, and can turn on a dime for you, for sure. So in the last minute or two, these are just some pretty standard questions that I ask people, for which there are no correct answers, other than the fact that clearly I know what the correct answer is. And so we'll fly through them. Are you ready?
Fire away.
Okay, baseball or football?
Football.
McDonald's or Burger King?
Neither.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
PC or Mac?
PC.
Beatles or Stones?
Stones.
Wine or beer?
Both.
Home or away?
Away.
Beach or mountain?
Mountain.
David, thank you very much for spending some time. It's been great fun, and it's been a real joy to talk to you. I haven't talked to you for quite some time. We let these things emerge into the freedom, out of captivity, or I do, about every 2 weeks. I'll let you know, and hopefully people will enjoy it. So thank you very much.
Okay. Good luck on your next road trip. And if you come over to the other side of Florida in my way, let me know. I'll be there, through the winter and fall, winter, spring.